So in this video I'm going to cover the best and worst bosses from every single video game I've played that I haven't already covered in the past 3 videos. And if you haven't seen those, watch them first, then pretend that they're part of this video, and then this video's title will make more sense. Anyway, I'm going to cover 10 different games from a few different series. I would have made all 4 of these best and worst boss videos into one, but it would have been probably over 30 minutes long, and I didn't want to do that all in one, so this final episode is just sort of a bunch of random extra stuff. First off is a selection of games from the Donkey Kong series, starting with Donkey Kong Country. The best fight in this game is probably Queen Bee. None of the fights in this game are actually too enjoyable, but this is my favorite of the bunch. You essentially just throw barrels at this giant bee while making sure it doesn't hit you. The worst fight is Neki Senior. It's this bird that you have to bounce off a tire to land on its head as it shoots seeds at you, but sometimes the seeds are really annoying to dodge, and it's just really not a good fight. Next is Donkey Kong Country 2, where the best fight is King Zing, another fight against a comedically oversized bee, but this time you play as a bird for some reason and have to shoot seeds at the boss as they fly around you. The worst fight is Cleaver. If you ask me, this one is just really drawn out, because for some reason every time you hit the boss you have to do a mini parkour course back and forth across the stage, and other than that there's really not much room to move around during the fight. Next is Donkey Kong Country 3, where I'm going to say that Baron K. Rool was the best, which is the final boss. Not because I really enjoyed the fight, just because it was the least annoying battle in the game in my opinion. And the worst is certainly Barbos. I truly did not understand how you were supposed to do this one, and I'll admit I had to use the rewind feature on the Switch Online software to beat it, because it was way too confusing and challenging for me. Also, it's underwater, and underwater levels always suck. Lastly is Donkey Kong Country Returns. The bosses in this one are definitely better than the original trilogy, and my favorite is Thugly. You essentially have to dodge his fire, jump over him as he runs under you, and jump on him to damage him. And there's 3 different stages where he changes colors each time, which I always thought was pretty cool, especially the first time I saw it. The worst is Mole Miner Max, because it's the only one I needed the super guide to beat and never actually beat myself, because the stupid minecart levels always suck in Donkey Kong games. Now it's time to cover the only Zelda game I've ever played through in full. Not Tears of the Kingdom yet, but Breath of the Wild. And the best boss here was probably Windblight Ganon, because it felt like the least gimmicky and most enjoyable of the 4 Blight Ganon fights. Meanwhile, the Thunderblight Ganon was the worst, because it was somehow harder than the final boss itself, and just really annoying to deal with overall. I spent way too long trying to beat this thing. Now, I've got one more Nintendo game to cover, then I'll move on to some non-Nintendo games, and this is Luigis Mansion 3, where the best boss in my opinion is Captain Fishhook. From a design perspective and gameplay perspective, I think this one was well executed, and he just seems like the most unique boss overall, since pretty much everyone else is just a normal ghost. The worst fight was Chambria, and I'm saying that because it was simply the least eventful and most boring fight. Nothing really special about it. Now I'm going to cover Minecraft, which has the largest selection of boss fights in video game history, and because of that, this was a tough decision, but I put the Ender Dragon at number 1, because whenever I fight this thing with friends, it's always actually a really fun time, and honestly, a really high boss on the boss fight tier list. The worst is the Elder Guardian, though, because it just feels like a enemy, and not a boss. And guess what? It's underwater, so it sucks automatically. Minecraft is a great segue into the next game, Terraria, which, by the way, my video about these 2 games reached 3,000 views, which is a new record for me, so thanks, everyone. Anyway, I honestly think the best fight in Terraria is the pillars, specifically the solar pillar. Boss fights that are just enemy rushes are usually pretty enjoyable, and these live up to that. I picked the solar pillar from the 4 just because it has the least amount of annoying enemies, to say the least. The last 2 games I want to cover are really random, so get ready for this. The first is Duck Life. Yes, that legendary Flash game series, and yes, I'm counting the whole series as one game. The best fight in the whole series is probably the final boss in Duck Life Space, where you race against that alien duck. Of the 3 final bosses in Duck Life games that involve you controlling the duck or your surroundings as they race a boss, this is the best executed of them. The worst boss is the final duck from the original Duck Life, because it's just a normal race where you sit and watch without doing anything, so not special. The last game I want to cover is probably the most obscure one I've covered in this whole series, but I'm sure there's some civilized people out there who remember it. I'm talking about Drive Ahead, one of the most legendary mobile games ever made. Except it sucks now, but that's besides the point. The best boss in this game is one of the Rift Riders bosses, the penguin thing. Drive Ahead boss fights involve you driving your car and trying to damage the boss by driving into them. I picked this as the best because this boss has a pretty neat move set, including this ice crystal attack. The worst boss is the giant crab that you fight in the missions mode, simply because it's the least interesting fight and is more like an enemy than a boss. Alright, now that I covered all this extra stuff, between this video and the last three, I've covered the best and worst bosses from every single video game I've played that has bosses in it, so now I want to name what I think are the greatest boss fight and worst boss fight in video game history. And both of these come from Mario, so congratulations and not congratulations to him, I guess. The worst boss ever is Squizzard, because I'll never forgive him for the pain he caused me. And the best fight ever is Bowser from New Super Mario Bros. Wii. And I already explained why I hate and love these two fights so much in the Mario bosses video, so check that out if you want, and also the Kirby and Pokemon ones. And if you like this, consider liking and subscribing and commenting and all that. And thanks for watching. If anyone is still watching for whatever reason, I want to say that the next video I'm going to make is a really big thing. I'm creating an entire Pokemon region, or Fakemon region, so that'll be neat.